Well, I think I can probably, with John Gerard, lay claim to being one of the very first people involved in it in the UK. I was taken on in mid-1989 as the architectural coordinator for Glasgow in its European City of Culture year in 1990. And part of the idea of that job was to make sure that it wasn't just about what they thought that would be, the Bolshoi or whatever. It would be about covering all aspects of culture, and heritage was beginning quite a newcomer to that whole debate of being part of your arts and music and performance, spectacle, participation, sport, I suppose. So to try and introduce architecture and the heritage, generally the built heritage, into that debate was really my job remit. And it was John Gerard, who was the then director of the Scottish Civic Trust, who'd been through Amsterdam, I think, earlier that year in 1989, and had come back with a pamphlet of something called European Heritage Day, where a lot of the cities in Europe and the countries and the towns in Europe, with government support, had already organised this thing. It had a very European feel to it already about people. I think they did it in a different way. They actually did it with paid curators coming in and taking on very fine buildings and allowing the public in and giving them quite professional, semi-professional tours. And we thought we'd try to do something very similar but very Glaswegian for 1990. I was seconded from the council into what was then Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, and we just decided what we'd do is just ask people quite simply, not hire in crews of curators or security guards or anything like that, but just ask people to open up their buildings. And I think in year one we got around, in 1990 we got about 60 buildings to open, and it's just grown and grown since then.
Were you surprised at how many buildings wanted to take part?
No, I think we could have opened more. I think what surprised us was how few buildings you can get around in a day or a weekend as we did it. So we thought people would probably manage them all. Of course you can't, because once folk have got you in their building, they want to tell you everything about it. And it'd be impolite not to have that cup of tea and have the chat and have a tour. But we were amazed at just how well a lot of the buildings, the churches, some of the institutions and some of the very ordinary houses, private houses opening then, they were probably quite overwhelmed, but just how welcoming everybody was to visitors, complete strangers walking around your in some cases, I say, your own home, which probably is something that's faded off a little bit because of the whole issue of security and everything now, which is a shame. But in the very first years, we were able to convince people to open up their own houses to anyone, complete strangers, to come through their door, which was great.
And how did the public respond at the time?
Obviously it benefited in 1990 from the fact it was part of the whole European City of Culture. So that was a wonderful PR and marketing and branding campaign. So it just got taken up very much in the wave, I think, that happened that year. It was an extraordinary year in Glasgow. But what was great was people immediately embraced the heritage as part of its cultural. It's an easy thing to say now because it's very much more bolted in, but actually not that long ago, 20 years ago, it was still something you had to very deliberately say as part of your cultural product, I suppose, and part of something you could actively enjoy as opposed to be a member of something or an institution. It was something the tag we had at the time, I think, was the song, Glasgow Belongs to Me. We really wanted to make that quite real on the day so that people really felt that this city, that Glaswegians in particular are so proud of and boast about, the famous kind of taxi driver anecdotes and all that. But so few people would not do things like go into a church they weren't a member of that faith of, or far more importantly, go into a football club that they weren't a supporter of, or a bank they didn't bank with. So actually we were really keen to get people to think that there's absolutely no barrier, there's definitely no entry charge, there's not even that thing of a guide at the door or a doorman or anything. It was just going to be as open as possible, and you'd not be challenged or obstructed or asked your name or anything. You could just walk in and just feel that it was as easy as walking on the pavement as walking right into that building. And I think we achieved that, and that's been the spirit of how Glasgow's continued to develop the Doors Open Day thing.
And do you think the fact that it's now become a national thing, and some years it's taken place in all 32 local authority areas of Scotland, do you think that's helped to give a sense of pride in Scottish architecture as a whole?
Yes, I'm sure it has. I think the fact it got taken up by the Scottish Civic Trust then and really promoted throughout the rest of Scotland, I think Glasgow, and I think Ayr went first in 1990 and really pioneered it for the whole of the UK. London, I think, was 2 or 3 years after that, and then other local authorities over the rest of the UK kind of behind that again. But the fact that it kicked off here, and then I think through the Scottish Civic Trust, they used their network throughout Scotland to promote it at, a very I think, a very lovely local level generally, using a lot of the civic societies that then existed to be manning and promoting the events, or a lot of the cultural museum departments and local authorities, and the kind of special hooks they had into a lot of these organisations, and very grassroots organisations, was great. And without a doubt, it's now a national event. The amount of people who just know about it and it's part of the language now is extraordinary. You wouldn't have expected. I don't think I expected that back in 1990. So that's been good.
And what do you think it is about Scottish heritage, particularly the built heritage, that is worth valuing, that we should particularly be proud of?
I think well, I suppose in a way, I don't know if it's particularly Scottish. It obviously runs the whole gamut. I mean, Scotland is so famed for its landscape, and yet the fact that its buildings can be as good as anywhere in the world as well, it means you top on both charts. And I think for a small country, relative to bigger neighbours, it has got some of the finest examples of everything you'd want to look at. So, and the landscape. So actually, taking, I suppose, the cream of the crop when we're doing it, but certainly within the Doors Open Days in Glasgow, and I think in a lot of other of the Scottish authorities, they do look at the unusual and the maybe not that architecturally important, but certainly socially very important buildings, or at a community level very important buildings. And it's the people that come along and tell you about what they've invested into that building that becomes that heritage, I suppose, rather than maybe the stone or the the turrets or whatever. So it's a wonderful mix, and I think we just cover it all in Scotland at a beautiful level, and people are prepared to travel huge distances, which you don't have to do in obviously a lot of the English boroughs or whatever, but people will do a Dumfries and Galloway Doors Open Day, and they'll be travelling hundreds of miles to get between buildings, which is wonderful, and you're taking in the whole place as well.
Speaking of treasuring buildings, we're inside Hutchison Hall right now as it's being worked on, which maybe people can hear in the background as we're talking. How has this particular building been involved in Doors Open Days?
Well, Hutchison Hall, I think, in fact, this year may well be the first year it's not involved in it in 2010, because it is under scaffold and it's having a major circa £500,000 programme of refurbishment on its external envelope, but it means that we won't get access in September to this, I'm pretty sure. But this has been involved since year one, owned by the National Trust of Scotland, and they're very clearly an obvious partner and bedfellow of the whole Doors Open Day movement anyway. So they were voted in very early on, and of course it is a publicly accessible building, but what NTS have done is waive the charge on that day. And again, to get back to that point about what people perceive as obstacles to going into a building, even if it's £2, that might be enough to be an obstacle for somebody who's lived in Glasgow all their life and passed this building all its life. But even if it's not the actual material fact of the money, they might be able to afford that. But it's putting a charge on something, it gives it a different feeling to a building you just walk through and into. Even the stopping and the buying of the ticket, whatever, folk are funny. And there's sometimes such a reason why we've never done it. So we just thought, with these buildings, with Historic Scotland's buildings, where they would normally levy an entrance charge on Doors Open Day, they waive that charge. So that's a wonderful addition to the programme. And this building has always had hundreds more people passing through it on that day than, we're all quite tight, clearly, we're not prepared to pay that entry fee any other time, but it works, and it's a nice advert for National Trust as well. Do
you have a favourite Doors Open Day event that you've either seen come up or that you've been to yourself that you can remember?
As far as the events go, I think one of my favourites, one year we organised, when I was still working for the Open Doors Day, a series of talks, which are now taken off, and it's a vastly bigger, more sophisticated programme. But we did a programme where we had somebody coming through Merchant City, we called it Merchant City Meanderings, and we had another one which ended up being Sandy Stoddart, the artist and sculptor, who decided to give us a walk through the necropolis. I can't remember what we called it. It was something quite clever with the necropolis, no matter. But Sandy, if anybody knows or has ever heard Sandy, is an artist, but with an extraordinary grasp of language, and can just bring even a cemetery alive, which sounds a little bit gothic, but he was able to just wander through Glasgow's necropolis and take an hour-and-a-half tour and it was like a Pied Piper event. People just joined because they heard him speaking, and he's so charismatic and magnetic. People literally joined on to the tour, and we just ended up having this horde of people wandering through the City of the Dead and absolutely buzzing with life.